Why does it hurt? This is a 3-part series, and I bet you've all asked this kind of question before. Because you're human and you live on planet Earth, which means that sometimes you suffer. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it hurts physically, but we suffer in a whole host of other ways as well. And the Bible does not shy away from the fact that this life contains suffering. It doesn't pretend that that doesn't happen. It acknowledges it. It has a lot to say about the subject of suffering. So that's what we're going to think about for the next 3 weeks, which is why the children were introduced to the topic by the story of Joseph, who suffered, but things worked out in the end. And I explained a couple of weeks ago that we're going to be looking at the book of Job. And I said you would find it helpful if you were able to read the book of Job before today. Well, if you haven't finished the whole thing, don't worry. We're only looking at the first couple of chapters, really, today. But if you're coming back over the next couple of weeks, I would really encourage you, if you can, to read the whole thing. I don't expect you to understand it as you read it, because it's quite a tricky book. But if you've got it roughly in mind what happens, that will make it much easier for you to understand as I briefly go over things over the next couple of weeks. So that's what we're going to be doing for these 3 weeks. Today, I'm not really going to be talking about suffering. I'm going to be introducing the book of Job and pulling on a few things which are not really answering the question, why does it hurt? Because I'm going to get onto that over the next couple of weeks. Some more basic things that we learn from the book of Job. And the first thing I want you to understand is this. The book of Job is an unusual book because it's basically a poem. It's a wisdom poem. It's like a drama. It's not one of the other type of books of the Bible. It's not a prophetic book. You know how some books like Isaiah were the words of the prophet Isaiah. Jeremiah is the words of the prophet Jeremiah. Some books of the Bible are the words of a specific prophet. It's not a book of the law. Some books of the Bible are there to teach us God's commands. It's not one of those. It's not a book of history. So you get books like Joshua and 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings and that sort of thing, which tell us history of how God interacted with people over a period of time. Job is not a book of history. And you might say, hang on, isn't it? Doesn't it tell us a story from history? Well, yes, but it's not really one of the history books of the Bible. Firstly, we don't know when the book of Job happened. The Bible doesn't say what part in time this thing actually happened with Job. It's speculated that it might have happened some point in the book of Genesis, during the time before there were priests, because Job makes his own sacrifices. He doesn't go to a priest to make a sacrifice. And that suggests maybe this is long before the days of Exodus and that sort of time. But we don't know. Next thing, it's not a book of history because it only tells us about a few weeks. We look at this book, but we find out very, very little. We know at the point that it starts, Joseph is already old enough to have adult sons. We then learn about a few weeks of his life, and then it says he lives another 140 years in Job 42:16. So for a man who lives, I don't know, if he had adult sons, he must have been, I guess, at least sort of 35, 40. So for somebody where he has a lifespan of maybe 180 or more years, we only learn a few weeks. So it's not really telling us about history. There are some people who think maybe this never happened. You know how Jesus tells a parable? And when he tells the parable, he isn't saying something that actually happened. He's telling a story that we're supposed to learn from. And maybe, some people think, the book of Job is like a parable. Maybe it didn't really happen, but the story is told so that we will understand something. No, I don't know. It tells us where Job was from, tells us the names of the people. Then again, some of the parables, Jesus names Lazarus as a person. So we don't know, is it real? Is it not real? It doesn't matter. The important thing is that we learn from it. but it's not a book of history. It's interesting that when they were deciding what order to put the Old Testament in, they chose to put it before Psalms. And when I say they, I'm talking about the Jews. The Old Testament was put in order long before Christians came on the scene. So they were looking and said, where does the book of Job fit? And they put it next to Psalms. Why did they put it next to Psalms? Because it's like a poem. It's like something to be performed. It's like a drama. It's not like a conversation, it's not like a history, it's not like a prophecy. It's like a play, a poem, a drama. So let me introduce it. We see a scene in heaven. And in heaven, God has summoned supernatural beings to come before him. And he talks to them. And he looks at Job, and he draws their attention to Job and says, have you seen Job? Job is absolutely brilliant. He is amazing. He is fantastic. There's no one on earth as good as my servant Job. And the enemy, Satan, says, well, of course he's brilliant. Of course he follows you. You protect him. You've given him all these riches, you look after him, you make certain nothing bad happens to him. Of course he follows you. Now, I'll tell you what's interesting there. The devil wanted to attack Job already, but he couldn't because God had said, he's under my protection. So, the devil, Satan, the enemy, says, if you stopped protecting Job, he wouldn't follow you the way he does. So, God says, okay, I'm going to withdraw some protection. You can touch anything of his, but you can't make him sick, you can't touch his body, you can't harm him personally, but you can cause damage to anything else. And then what happens is catastrophe. Everything utterly falls apart in Job's life. And yet, still, he follows God. And then God says to the enemy, you see, he's still brilliant. And the enemy says, well, that's because you wouldn't let me harm him personally. If you let me harm him personally, he'd soon stop following you. So God says, okay, you can't kill him, but you can do anything else. And the devil afflicts him with terrible illnesses. It is catastrophe for Job. This sets the scene. It's 42 chapters long, and all of this is in less than 2 chapters. The scene setting, it's like there's going to be a drama. There's going to be something that you're going to learn about. There is a scene in heaven. There is a scene on earth. And there is a confrontation between God and the enemy. We've set what's going to happen. And then we see the next step. 3 friends arrive. They come to him and they wail. They go, Job, what has happened to you is so awful. It is so terrible. They tear their clothes because they're showing how much they sympathize, how an awful thing has happened to Job. And then they sit in silence for 7 days. You know, I said this whole episode only lasts a couple of weeks. Well, 1 week of that is them sitting in silence. They just sit there, no one saying a word as Job is suffering. And his friends just sit there with him. And then they have an argument. Job begins to speak. Job talks about how awful his situation is. And then the friends one by one start to reply. There is a pattern to what happens. There is Job, friend 1, then Job, friend 2, then Job, friend 3, then Job, friend 1, then Job, friend 2, then Job, friend 3, then Job, friend 1, then Job, friend 2, then Job, friend 4. Friend 4? We didn't know there were 4 friends. The Bible says there were 3 friends. And all of a sudden we've been taken by surprise. because we were expecting it to be friend 3 again, but it's not friend 3 because this is a drama, and suddenly a new character is introduced, and friend 4 starts talking. He starts making sense. He says, your big argument, you've misunderstood everything, and just as people are starting to get it, then God appears, and God starts to speak, and God starts to explain, and it's a shock, surprise, because what God is saying is not remotely what any of the humans were saying, and people are astonished, and then they all live happily ever after. That's the book of Job. Now, you see what happens. It's like a drama. It's a series of speeches. It's a series of arguments that are trying to convey something. It's not one of those books that you read line by line. If you've read it already, you've probably thought, oh my goodness, there's just this person says this, and this person says this, and this person says this, and it's really hard to get your head around. But when I explain it like Job 1, Job 2, Job 3, you suddenly see there's a pattern. It's meant to be understood as a whole. So next couple of weeks, I'm going to try and help you to understand it as a whole. But as I said, today, we're trying to pick up on just a few parts to the book, which maybe are not part of the whole, just a few points that we can pick out to begin with. The next thing I want to talk about is this. This is not a book about the enemy. This is not a book about how to deal with the enemy. You see, the enemy in here has a very small part. He turns up in verse 6 of chapter 1. His last part is in verse 7 of chapter 2. Out of 42 chapters, he gets about 1 chapter of the whole story. You might think this is a book about the devil, but it isn't a book about him. It's worth remembering that the way he operates in this book is not the way that he operates on earth now. It is not the way that he can operate with Christians. Some people read this book and they see the enemy causing affliction to Job, and they start to get worried about the enemy. Well, James 4:7 says, submit yourself to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. You see, Job didn't have that privilege. Job didn't have that ability. So the way that the enemy relates to Job is completely different to the way that the enemy can relate to us. So do not go mistaken, understanding things wrongly based on that little bit about what we learn about the devil. It is worth noting that there is an unseen world that impacts upon our physical world. Now, that part of the story, that's very relevant. The fact that there is God in heaven who is looking at the earth, that there are things that happen because of the spiritual world. So that is a good thing to remember. If you want to know more about this, then at the start of this year, I did a 5-part series called The Spiritual Battle. And if you do want to know about this topic, then it's a useful topic to understand about. It's on our YouTube channel. Go back. I'm not going to be talking about the enemy anymore because this series is not about him. Go back and look at the Spiritual Battle series if you want to understand about that. Next thing I want to talk about, the third of 5 things I want to talk about is this. We learn from this story that bad things happen to everyone. Bad things happen to everyone. You see, Job was good. Job was a really, really good guy. God commends him as being a really good guy. He says to the enemy, have you seen how fantastic Job is? And yet, suffering came. Doesn't matter how good he was, suffering came. Jesus is perfect. And yet, he was nailed to a cross. He was beaten. He was whipped. He had thorns stabbed into him. He died. He was crucified. Being good, being the best you can be, does not mean suffering will not be part of your life. God does not promise that your life is going to be free of problems. I say this every now and again, but this is really important. John 16:33, the promise of Jesus is, in this world You will have trouble. But take heart. I have overcome the world. So this is a strange promise of Jesus. This is not the promise that we like to think about. We like to think about all the promises of deliverance and blessing and that sort of thing. But Jesus said, yeah, you will have trouble. But it's going to be okay. I have overcome the world. But you will have trouble. So it's really important. We should never pretend that nothing will go wrong for Christians. If we're talking to somebody about being a Christian and we say, if you become a Christian, everything will be great, nothing will go wrong. Well, that's a really stupid thing to say. Because you and I know that being a Christian doesn't mean that everything is going to go fantastically well. Bad things continue to happen to everyone. I'm not saying you should expect things to go wrong. I'm not saying you should go through life saying, oh no, something terrible is going to happen because suffering comes to us all. So what's the next thing that's going to happen to me? No, I'm not saying that, okay? We have faith for the good and for the best and for the blessing. So please don't get me wrong. But if you go through life thinking that nothing's going to go wrong, you're going to have problems. Because if we think nothing's going to go wrong and then it does, we think God's let us down. If you have a problem, don't go thinking God's let me down. If you have a problem, don't go thinking, well, how did that happen? Because I'm not supposed to have problems because I'm a Christian. We do ourselves no favors going through life pretending that everything will be great, because then when something does go wrong, we go, how did that happen? I thought God was supposed to help me. Why did God allow this to happen? Doesn't God love me anymore? We get into a whole negative mindset because we misunderstood things from the beginning. Preachers sometimes promise things that God never promised. And then we listen to what the preacher says and the promises that they've given. And then when God doesn't live up to the preacher's promises, we say, God's let us down. No. It was the preacher who told you that nothing's going to go wrong. Bad things happen to everyone. So, on that basis, here's a few pointers. Don't judge someone who's suffering. We'll see that this is one of the problems that Job's going to face next week. That his friends assumed that the reason he suffered was because he'd done something wrong. Do not assume that because something goes wrong in someone's life, it's because they've done something wrong. Not necessarily true. Jesus said in Luke 13, 1-5, I'm not reading every part of these verses. I've just missed out a less relevant bit in the middle. But this is what it says. Jesus was informed that Pilate had murdered some people from Galilee as they were offering sacrifices at the temple. Jesus asked, do you think those Galileans were worse sinners than all the other people from Galilee? Is that why they suffered? Not at all. And what about the 18 people who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them? Were they the worst sinners in Jerusalem? No. So Jesus has been pretty clear. Just because something bad happens to somebody, it doesn't mean that they were a really bad sinner. That's not how it works. None of us is perfect. Every single one of us sin. And therefore, if suffering is as a result of our individual sin, we'd all be suffering all the time. It doesn't make sense. Now, here's something that I struggle with. I sometimes meet people and they are suffering because they've done something wrong. Because they might have made bad choices. I'll be honest with you about the food bank. There are some people who come into the food bank and we hear the story of why they're in need. And you just think, oh my goodness, you had no control over the situation. I feel so sorry for you. People who've been thrown out of houses, whose partners have left them, who've suffered an illness, who've lost a job, and suddenly, through no fault of their own, they're in a really difficult circumstance. And those people, I don't judge them at all. I go, oh my goodness, that's terrible. And then some other people come in who are plainly addicts, who are plainly made some very bad choices about what they spend their money on. And do you know what my natural instinct is? I judge them instantly. That is now my natural human reaction. I judge them and think, well, if you hadn't spent your money on the drugs and the alcohol, you wouldn't need this food. It is very easy when you know that somebody's done something wrong. When somebody has borrowed loads of money on a credit card to buy loads of nice things, and then they can't afford to pay it back, and they're in debt because they bought a load of things they didn't need. Do you know what my instinct is? I judge them. I think, oh, the reason you're in debt is because you made bad decisions. But here's the thing I try and tell myself. I don't know what contributed to that bad decision. No one decides to be an addict. Once someone is an addict, they have lost so much control over their choices. Their body becomes in need of the substance they're addicted to. Their ability to make good choices is reduced. And sometimes the reason that people get into over drinking, illegal drugs, that sort of thing, sometimes the reason they get into that is because they have suffered and they can't cope with the suffering. And they found a release in taking something that wipes their mind for a while. And I need to remember that and not judge somebody, because they might be making some bad decisions today, but I don't know the path that they've been on to get into that place. So we need to be very careful about judging people because they're suffering. Next thing, fourth out of the five things I'm talking about, is the importance of being with people. You see, these three friends we're going to learn about, they do a lot wrong. They've got some really, really stupid things to say. But I tell you what, they were there. This is one thing they got right. They came to Job. And they sat in silence for 7 days. You know, I, as a pastor, like to talk to people. And I like to have the right thing to say. But I've learned this. There isn't always a right thing to say. Sometimes there's nothing you can say that's really going to make much difference. I'm going to talk a lot about this next week, about some of the things that we think we ought to say when somebody's suffering and why they're a really bad idea to say. But this is what I've learned. If you are just with someone in their suffering, you make a difference. Even if you say nothing, the fact you have gone and you are there makes a difference. Men, British men, we can find it very hard to talk. If nobody's there, it's even harder to talk. If you're there for a long time and you don't talk about anything important, that's the lead up to being able to talk about something important later. There's a toxic culture around men sometimes. And one of the things is finding it hard to talk about how you really feel, about what's really going on in life. Do you know what one of the keys to being able to overcome that? It's simply spend some time together. And as you spend time together, and as you talk about all the inconsequential things, and finish talking about all the sport, and finish talking about all the best routes to get from here to there, when you've done all of those conversations that men find easy, then if you spend time together, you can start to open up. They let him speak. 7 days they were silent. And the only thing that breaks that silence in the end is Job speaking. Sometimes we're so quick to fill a silence. Sometimes we're so quick when somebody's suffering to want to come in with the simple answer, with the, oh, it'll all be all right in the end. Sometimes the right thing to do is to take your lead from the person you're talking to. Don't try and impose your mood upon them. Don't try and impose your theology upon them. Sometimes the best thing to do is be with the person and let them speak and say what they want to say. And you take your lead from them instead of doing what a lot of preachers do. We come in and we say, here's the suffering, here's the Bible verse on suffering. I will apply the Bible verse to your life and everything will be great. Doesn't always work. In fact, doesn't really ever work if you don't take your lead from the person first. Now, in terms of what we do, give practical help when you can. We will see later, Job 42 verse 11, when the whole thing finishes, Job has lost everything, and his friends and his family, they all come and they all give him a little bit. And out of that little bit, he is able to grow and become a very rich man again. But there's a point where he needs practical, in fact, in this case, financial help. So one thing we'll learn from the book of Job is, give practical help when you can. Give time when you can. Send a message when you can. You know, if you know someone's suffering and you don't know what to say, well, just say, I'm thinking of you. Send them a text, send them an email that just says something like, thinking of you, praying for you. Can't imagine how you're feeling, but I'm thinking about you. The difference it makes for somebody just to know somebody is thinking and caring is immense. Don't worry that you haven't got the perfect scripture to write on the text or the perfect encouragement. Sometimes people don't need that. They just need somebody to acknowledge they know that you're going through something tough. So, when you can, give practical help, time, or even just send a message. Do not avoid people who are suffering because it's easier for you. I'm being straight with you here. Do you know what the easiest thing to do as a human, as a pastor, when somebody's suffering? The easiest thing to do is avoid them. Because you're worried you're going to make a mistake. You don't know if you've got the right thing to say. So, to make it easy for us, what we sometimes do is avoid the person. Don't fall into that trap. Being with people is really, really important. Final thing that I want to talk about is this. It is a young perspective. Okay, a young perspective. Now, friend 4, who does not turn up until chapter 32, we know he is a younger man than all the rest. We know he's a younger man than all the rest because he says, I waited till all of you guys had finished because you're older than me. So I waited till you finished. So the first thing I want to say is this. So young people, all right? I hope the young people are listening to this because this is directed particularly to the young people. It is good to listen to age and wisdom because the people older than you know more than you know. They have experienced more than you have experienced. And you think they haven't got a clue. You think that you're living in a modern age and they don't understand the modern age and they don't understand the pressures that you're under and therefore you don't want to listen to them. I'm here to tell you it is good to listen to people who are older than you and have lived experience. It's really important. Okay? So that's the young people. Now older people, and by older I mean anyone over 18. Okay? Older people, this is what I want you to hear. It is good to listen to a younger perspective because this guy was right, very right to wait until the age and the wisdom had spoken, but it turns out they didn't understand. It turns out they were wrong. It turns out that the young person did understand better than the older person. So it was great to listen to the older people first, but then the older person must listen to the younger person, because maybe they do know something that you don't know. Maybe what you learned to cope with doesn't work for them. Maybe society has changed, so what worked in the days when we were growing up doesn't work in the days when they are growing up. So let's be absolutely clear. We listen to each other. We should never be ageist. We should never discount someone because they're older. We should never discount someone because they're younger. This is part of what the book of Job teaches. It's not about suffering, which is why I thought I'd throw it in now whilst we're just talking about what we learn from the book of Job. It's also worth noting in Job 33 verse 32, in the middle of what he's talking about, he just stops and says, I haven't finished, but before I go on, does anybody want to say anything? All right? This is another thing that I'm bad at, but I'm trying to get better at. Because once I start going, I like to say everything. Lay out the whole thing. But I've learned what it's better to do is to say a bit and then say, does that make sense? Do you want to add something? Do you want to say something? So we're having a conversation instead of me just spouting and you listening. Now, of course, the problem is now you don't get a chance to talk because we're in the middle of a sermon. But seriously, if after this you've got questions, if you want to teach me something about the book of Job that I haven't noticed, that I haven't understood, I love to have conversations. I don't assume I'm right about everything. I don't assume I've got all the answers. So please, I would love to hear your opinions as well if you want to come and talk to me afterwards. So those are the 5 things that I want us to think about today. So, your response. This is how we can go forward today. Firstly, if you've not yet read the book of Job, if you have, well done. Fantastic. If you've not yet read the book of Job, I know 42 chapters sounds a lot, but they're really short chapters. So you can usually get about 2 chapters to a page. In fact, sometimes more than that. Some chapters are really short. So it would really help you if you come back next week if you've read Job all the way to the end before next Sunday. Second thing is this. Think about how you listen to people. Do you discount those older or younger than you? If you are, start listening. Don't make assumptions about why someone is suffering. Because you see somebody suffering, even if it looks like it's their own fault, please do not assume that you understand everything that brought them to that point. And if you recognize that, that will really help you not to be judgy. All right? I'm not perfect at it, but I'm getting better by reminding myself of this truth. Also, don't make any assumptions about why you are suffering. Because as we've already said, bad things happen to everybody. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily mean that if something bad happens to you, that you've done something wrong. Okay? I've got a sore throat. I've not been very well this week. I don't think that that's got any major importance to anything. Okay? Stuff just happens. Do not avoid those who are suffering. Recognize that if you know someone is suffering and you feel, I can't go to them because I wouldn't know what to say, well then, think about it. Is this about you or is this about them? And maybe you can do something. Maybe you can help in a practical way. Maybe you can go and spend some time with them. Or maybe you can just send them a message saying that you're thinking of them. That's how we can begin to respond to someone that we know is suffering. I'm very aware that for a subject which has a title, Why Does It Hurt?, I have not given you any information to answer that question. I've kind of left it. This is like it's hanging, isn't it? It's like, oh. I love it when a sermon comes to a conclusion where you go, yes, that's it. Yeah. This is not one of those sermons. This is one of those sermons which sets the scene for what's going to come later. But we are also going to respond by taking communion.